Okay, so that's our demo, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things before we move into comment and questions. I just wanted to reiterate regarding the start times and the end times. That was a big concern that came up during our stakeholder conversations, because especially for our family members and providers living with their recipients, they provide the service periodically throughout the day, on and off all day long. And it didn't make a lot of sense to have them checking in and out on and off all day long. That would become very cumbersome. And one of the goals that we have is to make this as least burdensome and least cumbersome as we can. So the concept that was developed was that the start time is the time the first service of IHSS or WPCS is provided during the day, and the end time is that last time that a service is provided during the day. So that is the definition for the start and the end times. It prevents that check-in, check-out, check-in, check-out as different services are provided throughout the day. So then what you will notice is start time and end time does not necessarily equal the amount of time worked during the day. So I may have begun work at 9 in the morning doing my first service, and I might have ended at 6 in the evening doing the last service and worked a total of 3 hours. Okay. So the total worked, the work hours is entered as we do today, the number of hours that is actually worked, and that's how the pay will be issued. The start and the end times are the first service and last service of the day. I also wanted to just touch on location with home, community, and both. Home is when the service is being provided to the recipient in the recipient's home, and community is anywhere else, and both is if during that same day you provided service both in the recipient's home and somewhere else. So just to touch on that. I also wanted to emphasize, it did mention in there, another big concern for many providers and recipients is being able to have paper records of the timesheets that were submitted. So there is the ability to print those out if the provider recipient wants to have those records. And again, this is has all of the same supports that happens in our electronic timesheets today. So as the provider is filling out the timesheet, they get the same prompts around violations for overtime. It doesn't allow it to be submitted without the PIN number entered, so there would be no signature errors, which is the primary error the timesheets get returned for today. And I also do want to just quickly say what you saw was the current electronic timesheet and then what the new timesheet will look like when it has the additional elements that are required for EVV. Okay, so now I just want to open it up to take comments and questions. The comments and questions, please today be focused on the tool and any concerns or questions that you have about the tool. And because we want to hear from as many people as possible and we want to know what you think about it, we're going to limit folks to a couple of minutes. And if it's another type of comment about EVV, please submit those through our website, or feel free to mail us any written information that you have. So Kim's going to be our timekeeper, and she'll let people know when time's up. And Carol will start in the room, and so they'll bring around microphones for the folks in the room, and then we'll go to the phones.
Thank you. Marty Yamoto, California Disability Senior Community Action Network and a family member. First, I want to thank you for the presentation. It was actually very good, even seeing it twice or hearing it twice actually, but it was well done. at least definitely as a first try. It's definitely very easy to understand. So got two questions. One, and you mentioned this before, but it's good to reaffirm it, that regarding if someone fills out the information wrong on the EVV part, what kind of penalty would exist if they filled it in wrong and both the provider and the recipient, the recipient filled it out. I mean, the provider filled it out wrong and the recipient approved it and it was still wrong. What kind of penalties? We know that you had said before that there's no violation, but what type of problem would exist?
It shouldn't create any problems, and there is no violations associated with it. It's simply the information that we are now required to capture under the new EVV rules.
And then the second question is, and again, thank you for your sensitivity on the the start of a service and the ending and the concerns raised by a lot of people out there, especially the family members. But I guess one of the concerns was the time that's put on there, and the time on the example was 12 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. on one day. And some people have mentioned the fact that they have to be available to provide a service. And so that's when they would indicate when they started. And I guess the question really is, from the state's point of view, on the time that's listed, is that the start of a paid service, meaning that has to correspond when you actually record or start a work that you get money for? Or can a person put the time that they have to be available? So that would definitely be true of a parent who's has protective supervision.
Protective supervision would be considered a service.
Right.
So EVV isn't changing the way we pay for IHSS. We pay the services that are authorized. So you would really be putting the time you start providing an authorized service.
So when it's paid, when you begin a paid service. And lastly, you mentioned just really quick about when paper timesheets would disappear or be ended. Do you have a time frame on that? I know it's probably in the future at some point, but just
so we're looking at
and thank you.
Sure. We're looking at the EVV process rolling out over the next couple of years or so. So it's going to be a lengthy process. We're trying to do it in a very methodical, slow way to ensure that as we roll it out, there's the appropriate support to the recipients and providers that are starting to use it. Okay, it doesn't look like anybody else in the room, so we can go to the phones.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star, then 1 at this time. If you're using a speakerphone, we ask that you please pick up the handset before pressing the numbers. Once again, if you have a question, please press star 1 at this time. And our first question will come from the line of Randy Hicks with California Disability Rights. Your line is open.
Hey, yeah, good. I just had a couple questions, and this has to do with the app and how you guys are going to put this in here. For people who don't have all the electronic equipment that they're supposed to be having to do EVV, is the state going to give them time to, one, put in the app, and is it going to be good for Android and for the Apple app? That's number one. And number two, is they're going to have to do this all electronically online to make sure they have the equipment and the computers and everything. They do it. Especially some family members, they may not have it. So how are you guys going to give them a pass on that? Or are you guys going to give them a grace period on that to make sure that they get all the equipment necessary to do electronic certification?
So remember, although what today we were demonstrating was the online prototype, it does not have to be done online. We're also going to have the option to use a regular landline telephone or a mobile phone. So there is the flexibility for both the provider and the recipient to use whatever approach works the best for them and meets their needs.
So part two is, what if you can't, how do you catch mistakes? How are you going to catch mistakes that they know that they made a mistake or that there's something that was added incorrectly? And I know you want to do that double check thing, does you hold their paycheck back until they do the double check thing? Do you also, I guess, after you do the double check thing, it affects how they fill out the timesheet? Because this is going to be new for everybody, as you know, and people are going to make mistakes. That's just the way it is, human nature.
So as far as payment, what's going to determine the amount we pay is what is in that that hours column. So it's just like it is today, whether it's being done on paper or electronically today. We pay based on the number of hours worked that is entered in that column. If someone enters information in that column incorrectly, or it's misread, then it would be handled as it is today when timesheets are submitted, and there's usually a conversation between the county office and the provider if there was an error in the pay because something was misread or entered incorrectly. But that's the column that we're looking at as far as pay. So that just like we do today on paper or electronically, we look at that number of hours worked, and that's what's utilized for payment.
One last question. It has to do with penalties. Right now, when people make mistakes, sometimes they're put on penalties if they go over the hours, like 37 and a half or something like that. Are penalties going to be suspended until you get the electronic certification up and running, and so people don't understand where it all goes and everything?
So there's no new penalties associated with implementation of EVV. The same rules as far as overtime will apply as applied today. So what will actually be helpful, hopefully, is that both of the EVV systems, both the online and the telephone one, will provide some real-time information back to the person completing it if they are filling it out in such a way that it would result in a violation. So they would have the opportunity to make that correction before submitting the timesheet. Whereas today with paper, if they make the error, it's submitted before it's identified. So again, no new penalties. The rules would apply as they do today. There would be more support through the system to assist the provider when they're filling it out to go ahead and make corrections. If a violation was incurred, as it is today, there's always the opportunity for the providers to submit a dispute of the violation, and that would be reviewed at the counties to determine if there was an error.
Next, we'll go to the line of Maxine Hayden with PRV. Your line is open.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, I was unable to access the webinar. I have older Windows XP, and then, to try to follow all of the instructions, I can't start.
So I'm sorry you were unable to access it. This will all be posted on our website in the next week or two. So if you weren't able to see it today through the webinar, you'll be able to view the demonstration on our website.
Okay, I have one other question.
Sure.
Right now on the electric timesheets, you have a help desk.
Yes.
A number you can call?
Yes.
If you need help?
Yes.
A recipient in trying to access the help desk, they tell me, we only help providers. And they send you to that 888 number, 888-822-9622. It seems that everything is set up more easily for the provider to access than for the recipient. If you choose number 2, all you get is a long list of instructions and websites, and it's very hard to.
So the help desk will be available for both recipients and providers with EVV, and it will be significantly expanded. in order to support everyone that will be converting.
Yeah, because, I'm not computer literate. I can email and do things like, but when it comes to anything complex, like trying to get into this webinar and having to choose all these different apps, I tried every one, and,
And I understand. And remember, as a recipient, you have the option to approve by telephone if that's easier for you. And even if your provider chooses to do the online option, you still have the option to approve by telephone. And with the telephone approval, what would happen is one of two things. You would have the option to wait until the system calls you and do the approval when you get that call. Or if you know that your provider has already submitted their timesheet, you can actually call in and do your approval that way. So if it's easier, if online is difficult for you and it's easier for you to do that by phone, that will be an option where the information would be read to you over the phone and then you would approve with your PIN number.
Next, we'll go to the line of Thomas Gregory with Center for Independent Living. Your line is open.
Thank you. At the most recent EVV Phase 1 stakeholder meeting back on July 23rd, CDSS staff indicated that CMS had not yet approved of California's approach to capturing the time of service element, the place of service element, and the type of service element. But staff did indicate that they were very confident that CMS would approve of California's approach, no problem. My question today is, are you still just as confident as you were back in July? And do you have an estimated date when you will be 100% certain that CMS is perfectly fine with California's approach to capturing those time, place, and type of service elements?
So there actually isn't an approval process for CMS to say we approve of EVV. What we've been communicating is that we believe that we are following the statute as it is written to meet those requirements, and that a part of CMS's direction or feedback has been that there is they're providing a lot of flexibility to the states to work with their stakeholders and to determine the approach that's best going to work in the state. And we believe that that's what we are doing, is that we're spending a lot of time talking to you all and doing a collaborative approach to this to come up with what's going to work best for the state of California and our recipients and providers, to be the least burdensome, which is also part of the statute, and to meet the requirements as it is written. And we still believe that that's what we are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The reason I'm asking the question is that I agree that California's approach to time, place, and type of service are the least burdensome and the least invasive of people's privacy. And although a lot of advocates I know are pleased with how California is approaching things, they're very worried about how other states might approach it. And they wanted to encourage fellow advocates in other states to encourage their state to follow California's example and try to replicate your approach. And I was just worried that a lot of effort might be put in that direction, and then suddenly we find out that CMS isn't okay, or that the federal government, I guess it would be CMS, is not happy with California's approach. And I'm just hoping to avoid that scenario. But it sounds like you guys are really confident, and so I'm going to take that as a sign that the community should also be just as confident.
Okay, sounds good.
Next, we'll go to the line of Liz Zerve. Your line is open.
Hi, I'm a parent provider and conservative with my son. I have a couple questions that you might address that in the past we've had problems for on both the helplines. They won't talk to me if I'm his conservator and he's the recipient. It would be good to clarify that, or do training for the people on the new helplines or already the existing ones. The other problem is he is nonverbal and protective supervision, so he really can't okay the time card. But it appears that I have to set up an email for him and act like I'm approving the time card I'm submitting. It would be good to clarify that for the parent providers who are also conservators somewhere in the training. I think that what you've come up with is a great idea given the original supposition from CMS and the legislation. I think it's concise and a good idea. It's just some of the things I think need a little tweaking. If I need to set up an email for him, tell me.
And that's really good feedback. Thank you very much. We do want to make sure that everybody is trained at the help desk and is aware of who can be talking about different things. And we are working on how we will handle individuals who are playing both roles in the system, and we'll make sure that the training materials address all of that. Thank you very much for the feedback.
Yeah, we're basically honest, but it gets tedious and have intermittent internet service. So if I get halfway through and it craps out, what happens then? Do we, it's the problem with living in the rural part of the state. If the neighborhood unplugs, or the neighbor that all our internet bounces off, turns his power off and leaves for the weekend, we're out of luck and there's nothing to be done.
Okay.
Just comments, but I think that looks good. And the other, if he has protective supervision, so if I do a 12:01 a.m. to 11:59 and do that all week, is that going to raise red flags with someone?
No, especially, the case information is available to the program, so it would be aware of the protective supervision in the 24-hour day need. You're then claiming appropriately, as you do today on your timesheet, the number of hours that are paid by IHSS as authorized service.
Next, we'll go to the line of Liva Hafakamian with LA County DPS. Your line is open.
Yes, this is Roy Rama from IHSS line in Los Angeles County. I have one or two questions. Actually, one of them is more like a comment. I think it should build into the system, the EVV timesheet prototype. I would suggest that they build in such a way that when the span of time, let's say the check-in and check-out span of time is less than the hours that claim, there should be some kind of alert. The span of time should be equal or greater than the hour claim.
Yes, and there will be an edit for that. And we've had people ask that before, and I should have mentioned it, which is if someone put in, I worked from 9 in the morning till 11 in the morning, accidentally, they were intending to put 9 in the morning till 11 at night, but they put 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then in the hours column indicated that they worked 8 hours. The system would actually give a message back saying that the time needed to be greater than the hours worked and equal to or greater than the hours worked. So that is being built into the system. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. And the other one is regarding to the check-in, check-out. You're doing the provider doing once a day check-in and check-out. Let's say that the provider checked out and later on the providers was called back due to some kind of emergency. The recipient called back to have the provider come back. How do the system allow that person to check out a second time for the same day?
No, there's just a first time a service is provided and a last. And as long as they haven't submitted the timesheet, they can make a correction to that last checkout time.
Okay, that's good to know.
Next, we'll go to the line of Connie Arnold. Your line is open.
Hi. Okay. Debbie and Kim, as an IHSS advance pay recipient, is CDSS trying to eliminate the advance pay option?
No.
And I'm wondering, I have a two-part question. Go ahead, Debbie. I see you shaking your head.
I was just answering no, we're not eliminating advance pay. And advance pay recipients are using the electronic timesheet system now. They would use it in the same way.
Well, I'm used to doing paper timesheets for all of my providers at the end of each month. So you're saying you're going to eliminate paper timesheets and you're going to give only a PIN number to providers.
So,
Well,
Connie, I don't know if you heard when I was talking about, because we had heard these comments from providers and recipients that maintain their paper records, that there will be the ability to print these out if you want them for your paper records.
Well, here's the problem that I have. How are IHSS advance pay recipients, who pay the provider directly for hours worked, but who also have IHO WPCS timesheets to fill out and separate the hours? How are we supposed to be able to do their provider timesheets if we have to separate IHSS provider hours from IHO WPCS provider hours when we aren't authorized monthly hours and when each provider doesn't know hours worked, say, by a morning provider? Do you understand what I'm saying?
So you're doing the same thing now, right? You have IHSS providers and WPCS providers, and we have in the system, when the provider goes in, they'll be selecting the type of timesheet they're filling out, whether it's IHSS or WPCS, and they'll enter their hours for whichever program they're completing that timesheet, just like they do it in paper today.
Okay, but right now, all that provider does is sign in and sign out. They don't know how many hours that were associated with IHSS versus, say, associated with IHO WPCS. Say you have 17, almost 18 hours a day of help, but you're going to use your IHSS hours first.
So, Connie, really you're talking about very specific individual circumstances. So if you have questions about that, then we can talk to you offline about it. But what we're trying to get feedback on today, and I need to make sure we take comments from everyone, is the tool itself and how it works. If there's something that you have a comment on as far as the tool itself, feel free to ask that. Otherwise, we can talk to you offline about particular circumstance. You're in a different situation than most people in the program.
Next, we'll go to the line of Alicia Hopkins. Your line is open.
Hi. I'm sorry. 3 questions. I want to know that since the app and the telephone version will be introduced later, will people be required to start with the electronic timesheet version?
No, and we aren't looking at starting anything until later summer of next year, and that would probably be as a pilot. The telephonic scripts, because really the telephone all has to do with the scripts when you call in, and the questions that are asked and the information that is then entered on the PIN pad. And all of that is going to be a part of the stakeholder process in the spring. So we will be introducing that and getting feedback on that so that both will be ready to begin at the same time.
Okay, and then my next question is, how will you make sure that the app permissions will not require location or need access to photos or storage on a phone? Because most apps have a requirement to access your photos, your storage, your contacts, also your location. I mean, I just think about this, that you say it's going to be not GPS tracking people, but I do have that concern in that reference.
So the 2 that we were talking about today, this is an online version that is basically a website, and it can be accessed on a phone as well as on any computer or electronic device. We haven't built the app yet. That will be something that's an option for people, but you don't have to choose it. And then there's the regular telephone.
People do choose the app.
Hang on one second. I'm going to go there. Hang on a second. So as far as if people choose the app, we're not collecting that information. What your phone does, I can't change what that does for you. And
no, you would have to change the permissions on the app. It's not about what the phone does, because when you build an app, the technical side of it is what data is being collected by the maker of the app.
And we're not going to be
thank you.
collecting. We're not going to be collecting any of that. We don't need it. We aren't. That's not how we're building our app.
So will the app maker or whoever sponsors the app be collecting that data?
So it's us. Okay, one of the big decisions with all of the stakeholders was that we are we're doing this with our current tools, and we design it with our vendor, and we are not designing it to do that. It's not we're finding some app somewhere else that does that.
At this time, we have no current questions in queue.
Anybody in the room have anything else to ask?
Connie Barker, SEIU 2015. Are you still planning to file for the 1-year extension?
Yes.
And is that still on track? Because it wasn't mentioned in any of this, so I just wanted to double check on that.
So one of the things that happened when they changed the date to 2020 is that then everything moved ahead a year. So that if good faith extension would be something we would be submit during the next fall. Okay. From the phone?
We do have a question from the line of Maxine Hayden with PRV. Your line is open.
Yes, I do have a question. You keep talking about a vendor. I'm wondering, have you announced who the vendor is that's going to be doing both the EVV electronically and the telephone? Is it one vendor?
It's our current vendor that we're working with that does our current system for IHSS, our case management information and payrolling system. We're actually in the process of going through a transition of those vendors. Our current vendor had been DXC, and the new vendor is CGI, and both of them are working with us through this transition period. And ultimately, it will be CGI who will be doing the ongoing running of the application.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1 at this time. And there are no questions in queue.
Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody for participating and your feedback, and we look forward to talking some more in the beginning of next year.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our conference for today. Thank you for your participation and for using AT&T Executive Teleconference. You may now disconnect.